if you look back at yesterday's Haftarah, you'll see that Rachav, the innkeeper, who these two spies that Joshua sent out stay with, she says to them, she says to the people that these people must have gone because they've gone before they closed the gates. And she sends the troops on a wild goose chase, whilst all the time the spies were hidden up in her loft, in her gag roof. So once the gates are shut, you can't get in or out of these cities. Say Jericho was a walled city, so was Gaza at this time. So they are waiting for him at the city gates because they know he's in Gaza. They can't find him individually because they're looking for him, but they don't know exactly where he is. But they know that when he leaves, he's going to have to go through the gate. So they're waiting for him there. They set a trap, vaye'ervulo, as that means they set an ambush for him. Okay, so then let's see what happens. Verse 3, Leon.
Yeah, it's very strange, this. Samson slept until midnight. He arose at midnight and grasped the doors of the city gate and the two doorposts and tore them out with the crossbar and placed them on his shoulders. He brought them to the top of the mountain that faces Hebron.
Okay, now there's a very strange thing. Now, Vayishkav, the Hebrew word is Vayishkav Shimshon ad chatzi alayla. Vayishkav means that he lay down. It's also a euphemism for sexual relations. Ad chatzi alayla, until midnight, and then Vayakom, he got up. He'd had enough. V'chatzi alayla, in the middle of the night, and then he goes to the city gates. And he grasps these enormous, huge things they are, of stone pillars and a huge lintel, and he sticks them on his shoulders and he schleps them up the top of the mountain. We don't hear anything about the people who are waiting there in ambush for him. He doesn't seem to engage them. They don't seem to engage him. The whole point of them staying there at the city gate was for them to jump on him and capture him when he went to the city gates. So it's a very strange thing. The commentators also think it's a strange thing. And basically the general feeling is here that the Plishtim saw him. They became frightened and they ran away, or at least if they didn't run away, they didn't attack him. And then as a show of strength, as it were, to sort of show them what he was capable of, he ripped out the city gates and took them up to the mountain in some sort of Iron Man challenge. Yes, Leon?
Well, it's strange. Either they didn't hear him. How could they not hear him? The way he tore them out, according to the translation, he tore the doors and the doorposts and the lintel, and they're sitting there, and they must have sat there all night, because it says that they lay in wait for him all night. It's very strange. They just did nothing.
It's a very odd story, and I suspect that what happened was that they got frightened. Let's see what Hilary thinks. Yes, Hilary.
I just wanted to say basically that if somebody came along like Iron Man, as you say, they're frightened of him anyway. He comes along, he wrenches up the gates, and what are you going to do? You're not going to stand there. You're going to run.
Yeah, I mean,
let's be honest.
You're right, but the question is, what were they thinking in the first place? If they thought
they obviously they didn't realise the intensity of his strength.
Yeah, I wonder whether that first verse that Leon read, which was the last verse of the last chapter, that Shimshon judged Israel for 20 years, I wonder whether the fact that 20 years had gone by meant that they'd actually forgotten or had not forgotten partially at least just what Shimshon was capable of. And they thought that they would be able to capture him by waiting in ambush. And then when he turns up and they see him, and presumably he must have seen them, because why would he rip out the gates just for nothing, just for you know, what was it, a bit of training for the Olympics? I mean, you know, there must have been a reason why he ripped out those gates. And I suspect he saw the Plishtim there waiting for him, and wanted to demonstrate to them his power, and to frighten them, because clearly that would have been a very frightening event for them. So I think he must have seen them. I suspect that they had forgotten how powerful he was, and that's why they thought they could do it. And then when they saw him, they realized they couldn't and took fright. Yes, Hilary?
And honestly, if you think about it, I think Howard said he could have gone much closer to home. He didn't need to go to the Plishtim to go with a harlot, right? So he obviously had a purpose for going there, for getting up at midnight and not staying till the morning, or there was obviously method in his madness.
Yeah, okay. I accept that. That was Paul's view, actually, Hilary. Paul was the one that was saying that he could have gone to the local talent. Well, you know, the Gaza girls are obviously more attracted to him. He's not the first time he's been down to Gaza to do that. So, but yeah, the strange things, he gets up at midnight and he's going home.
Can I say something?
If the idea was to provoke them, this was a very strange way of provoking them, because you would think that he would not hide away so they can't find him if he was going to provoke them. But clearly they were provoked, and they went to, and that gave him an opportunity to rip out the gates. Yes, Howard, and then Faye.
Okay, I've had my hand up the whole time. I really wanted to say something.
Howard first, because he had his hand up first. Go on, Howard.
Obviously, we all know it's a long way. It's actually over 800 meters to walk from Gaza to Hebron. Would take 17 hours when you're not carrying 2 doorposts and a lintel. So it's quite amazing. The distances are just ignored.
Well, I think it's also a reflection of Shimshon's huge size, and presumably therefore he had huge footsteps as well. Because if you think about it, to be able to carry these things, and in fact the Gemara says that his wingspan, if you like, his arms were 60 cubits. The Gemara says that Shimshon's arm span was 60 cubits. That's 60 amot, and amma is 18 inches. So we're talking 90 feet. He had a wingspan, 1.5 cricket pitches, 30 yards was his wingspan, according to the Gemara. So presumably his footsteps were not that little either, Howard. So yeah, I mean the whole thing is odd, yeah. But I think it's whether we accept it as being literal, and he literally took it up to the top of the mountain, or whether we say this was just an expression of his huge, immense, superhuman strength. It could just be that. Yes, Faye, you've been waiting patiently.
Very impatiently, actually. Am I?
Yes,
no.
Yes, no, you're on.
Okay, I unmuted. Okay, 2 things. Number one, his whole purpose in life when he came in was to engage the Philistines and to, like, you know, every action that he did, even until then, was always intimidating them and engaging them so that he could, like, get in there and really sock it to them. So that's, like, I think that's part of what he's doing. That's number one. 2, in terms of, he didn't go to Hebron. He went al Panei, he went to Ahar Asher al Panei Hebron. So I'm thinking about when we went on one of these trips where we had this wonderful lookout, and you could see as far as Gaza. You could, you could definitely get a viewpoint on the top of one of those mountains. Maybe he was even on that mountain. And I don't know if we saw Hebron, but we definitely saw Gaza from there.
Yeah, it could be that he never actually went as far as
No,
Hebron.
it doesn't say he went to Hebron. It says he went al Rosh Hahar Asher al Pnei Hebron. That's facing Hebron.
He went
facing Hebron.
He went to the mountain which is Al Pnei Hebron, which is close to Hebron. Okay, fair comment. Okay, Sharon and then Paul, and then I want to move on if we can. Sharon,
we're not saying close, we're saying facing. There's a difference. Okay, go ahead.
Just a comment from Zhabotinsky's book. First of all, he makes a big point of the fact that the Philistines were already advanced in metal and iron. And here is Samson defying them with the stones of the gate, not with their own iron, but showing them that he has the capacity to, despite their secret weapon of iron. Secondly, this sounds to me like an extremely tall tale, and I think that we have to give it some of the fun of an oral storytelling in order to really enjoy it. I had a third point, but we'll leave it at that.
Okay. Okay. I mean, as far as the tall tale is concerned, I don't think it's any taller than ripping a lion apart or killing 1,000 people with a jawbone of an ass. I think it's fairly consistent with his abilities. We either accept those abilities as allegorical, or we accept them as literal. I think most of us would accept those as literal. That's what the story is meant to be telling us, that he had enormous strength. Whether this is exaggeration and a tall tale, I suppose you could take that, but that's not the standard understanding.
The third point from Jabotinsky is that I wanted to raise is that he suggests that he had a whole band of followers like Robin Hood in the Philistine territories, and that when he was in the Philistine territories, he did not observe the Nazirite restrictions. That's all. I'm just giving you Jabotinsky.
I don't think we have any evidence for that at all, and I would challenge that, because the one time when he doesn't keep his Nazirite restrictions, which we will see later on in this chapter, when he has his hair cut, he loses his strength. Well, he clearly hasn't lost his strength here, so I doubt that is the case, that he had broken his Nazirite vows at this point. Yes, Paul?
It was regarding liquor.
We've no evidence of that either.
Yes. I just want to point out that he didn't used to go to Gaza to find his losers. He went to Timnah previously. This is the first time. He only went to Gaza afterwards to kill the people and take their clothes. That was not to find women. So this is the first time he's gone to Gaza for a woman.
Okay, it's not the first time he's gone out of his locality, though.
You keep on changing it, can't I?
Okay, fair comment. Okay, now, so the strange things about this chapter is that this story of Shimshon ripping out the gates and taking up the mountain, it just stops there. We don't see any consequences. We don't see what the Philistines did or didn't do. We don't hear that there was a quiet in the land. We don't have any reaction to it, which I think is a little bit odd. And we begin the next section with the words "Vayehi achrei chen," and it was after these things. And when we use that expression in Tanakh, it usually indicates that there is a time lapse between the two events. So this was just, if you like, another of the escapades of Shimshon. We're not told really how it ends. Perhaps that is the end of it, and perhaps what it's telling us is that by Shimshon doing this, he managed to frighten off the Philistines for another period of time, and actually he managed to do that this time without killing anyone, and they were sufficiently scared of him to lay off for a while until Vayehi achrei chen. And now we are going to come to the story that you have all been waiting for. I'm just going to share my screen with you for a moment and share this with you.
Now relive the colossal drama of the mightiest colossus that ever lived. Samson and Delilah, the immortal story of the strongest man in all history, a masterpiece of big screen entertainment. Samson, who alone and unafraid challenged and defeated the most dreaded army of his time. His daring exploits have become legend. The lion of the desert he fought with his bare hands. See as he saw the orgies of barbaric pagans that roused his vengeful fury. But Samson was ensnared by the seductive beauty of Delilah. His lust became a trap that led to his downfall and capture. Enchained, he was tortured and blinded. Here is the most spectacular scene of destruction ever filmed. Samson using his incredible strength to bring down the Temple of Dagon in crashing ruins.
That was fun, wasn't it? Okay, we can stop the shear now. Now you know what happens.
I thought you said he had a 60-meter wingspan.
Yeah, they couldn't do that in 1937, Dave. They probably could do it now. Yeah. What was interesting in that, by the way, I just want to see if any of you noticed. Did you notice that they brought in some other Torah ideas into that little clip there, which don't belong in the Shimshon story? Anybody notice anything there that came from something which we will read actually in 2 weeks' time in the Torah? Yes, Philip.
Dagon, yeah, Dagon wasn't the god. It was Baal who was the god there.
No, it wasn't. It was Dagon. You're going to see it's Dagon. They were right about that. Anybody? Anybody spot it?
Feast.
So what did you say, Paul?
Was it when he came to the pagan feast? I don't understand. No, but Cecil DeMille obviously agrees with me about Samson. You know, he thinks he was a good guy.
Yeah, I think he does. Yeah, I think he does. No, what I was referring to, did you notice the guy that there was at the orgy, somebody took a spear and threw it all the way through this woman who was presumably was meant to be one of the participants in the orgy. But of course, that's borrowed from the story of Pinchas, isn't it? Of Cosby Bass, whatever her name was, I've forgotten now. Zimri and Cosby, that's it. Who cavorted in front of the Mishkan, and Pinchas took a spear and stuck it through them. So I thought that was really interesting that Cecil B. DeMille has obviously read Parshat Pinchas, or actually it's the Parshat before Parshat Pinchas at the end of Korah, and knew that and put it in there in the trailer for Samson and Delilah. So I thought that you'd like to see that.
Cecil B. DeMille didn't read the Mephorshim on it. Otherwise, the spear would be in a different part of their body.
Oh yeah, this is family entertainment, David. Family entertainment. Yeah. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's read actually what the Tanakh tells us, what happened in the story of Samson and Delilah. Chapter 16, verse 4.
It happened after this that he loved a woman from the Sorek brook. Her name was Delilah. The governors of the Philistines went up to her and said to her, "Entice him and find out by what means his strength is so great, and by what means we may overpower him, so that we may bind him to afflict him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson.
Okay, stop there a sec, Leon, sorry, yeah. Okay, so here he is. He's now fallen in love with a woman at the Sorek brook, Nachal Sorek. We're not told what her nationality is. We're not told that she's a Philistine, and I suspect she is not a Philistine. She's certainly not an Israelite, but I don't think she's a Philistine. And the reason I don't think she's a Philistine is because the Philistine generals come to her and bribe her with money to do this deed of betraying Shimshon. If she was a Philistine, I think they would have appealed to her national, whatever the word is I'm looking for.
Patriotism.
Patriotism, thank you, Leon. And they wouldn't have had to pay her. Steinsaltz tells us this about the 1,100 pieces of silver. There were, by the way, there were 5 governors of Philistine. And it says here by Ya'alu aleh sarnei plishtim. It doesn't say how many of these governors, but there were 5. Each of the Philistine cities, we know there were 5 cities. See if I can remember them. There were Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gat, and Lachish. So the 5 cities all had their governors. So 5 governors each came along and offered 1,100 pieces of silver. 5,500 pieces of silver were being offered. Now, Rav Steinsaltz says this. He says this. Later in the book, it becomes clear that 10 pieces of silver was a respectable annual salary, not including food and clothing. So if 10 pieces of silver were a respectable annual salary, let's say an average annual salary. So let's say, to make it easy for calculation, that an average salary would be 100,000 shekel a year. So that's the equivalent of 10 pieces of silver. She was being offered 5,500 times the annual pieces of silver. So 550 times the annual salary. That's what she was being offered. The most enormous sum of money. So if you work it out in terms of millions of shekels, let's work it out. 100,000 shekels, 100,000 shekels, let's say, times 550 is 55 million shekels she was being offered. 55 million shekels was her reward for dobbing in Shimshon. It's hardly surprising that she agreed to do it. I thought at first when I read this that this was a bit, it wasn't very nice of her to betray him. They were meant to be lovers. It's not the kind of thing you do to somebody who you're meant to love. But the enticement of 55 million shekels equivalent is really, I think, explains her behaviour. It was hard for her to resist that. So they have obviously realised by this time that Shimshon has these superhuman strengths, and there's something not normal about him. I suspect that the first part of the chapter where he schleps the gates up the mountain is the point at which time they realize that, hang on a minute, this just isn't a very, very strong guy. This guy's got a secret. Why is he so strong? There must be something which is making him to be so super strong. And so they've now come to Delilah as their best option for finding that out. Let's carry on. Verse 6.
So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me what makes your strength so great, and how you could be bound to afflict you."
Let's just stop there for a moment. Imagine you're Shimshon, and you're this woman with whom you are spending time and purport to love asks you that question. Would you be suspicious that she was wanting to dob you in, or would you think she's just being curious and wants to know why you're... no, there's a lot of shaking of heads there. I think he must have known. Do you not think that he must have known that she was... that there was something fishy going on? I must ask Paul this. Paul, what do you think?
Absolutely. Especially as the game, the two false sons of the Philistines turned up. Yeah, sure.
Right. So, but the interesting thing is, let's see what happens anyway. Verse 7.
Samson told her, "If they bind me with 7 wet twines that have never been dried, I will become weak and be like any other man." The governors of the Philistines then brought her 7 wet twines that had never been dried, and she bound him with them.
Okay, let's
and
stop
there was
there.
an ambush.
Hang on a sec, let's stop there. So he tells her this cock and bull story, and the next thing he knows, she's got these 7 ropes. But how did she manage to bind him? This is a very strange thing. Either he thinks this is a game, maybe, I don't know, maybe this is part of their excitement, I don't know, maybe there are people that do these things, or maybe he just thought, you know, he was teasing her with these things, or the Mephoroshim seem to say that he was asleep. Yes, Michael?
I was just going to say the same thing. He was in the post-coital slumber.
Okay, thank you for that. He was in a post-coital slumber. That seems to be the general impression of the Mephoroshim. It seems to me that he
the story.
Who was the first one?
He must have been a very deep sleeper. But anyway, either way, whether it was done, Steinsaltz, by the way, doesn't agree with Michael Leaf. Rav Steinsaltz says, presumably, she explained to him that it was a game of sorts, or she did this while he was asleep. So both explanations are given there. Okay, so verse 9.
And there was an ambush party sitting for her in the room. She said to him, "Philistines are upon you, Samson." And he snapped the twines as flax straw snaps when it smells fire, and his full strength was not even apparent.
Okay, now this is another strange thing to my mind. There was a Philistine ambush, and the Hebrew words say this: the ha'orev, and the ambush, Yoshev la, were sitting with her, b'cheder, in the room. So what's going on here? He's completely out for the count. She binds him up, and there's a whole bunch of Philistines there, and he's sleeping through the whole thing. Very peculiar. And then she wakes him up, and he breaks these things like they were just nothing. And he doesn't even use even a small part of his strength. It says that his strength was not fully demonstrated. Now, what's interesting is that we don't see, and I think this is a change in Shimshon's personality from 20 years ago. Remember, we've had a 20-year, at least a 20-year, more than 20-year hiatus from the previous escapades with the jawbone of the ass, because he judged for 20 years, and then he had the business with the gates, and then it says after these things. So we've got at least 20 years between his previous escapades and these. When he was a young man 20 years ago, do you think that he would have just laughed it off and not beaten the living daylights out of these Plishtim who were in the room waiting to jump on him? I think not. But Shimshon has matured in as much as we don't see that he snaps the ropes and chases them away, kills them, beats them up, does anything to them. We don't hear anything. He snaps them, and it seems that the ambush sort of off he goes, off they go. So I think that this, to me, this demonstrates a maturing of Shimshon. He seems to have more patience. He seems to have to be less easily provoked into violence. And if we're going to say, as Paul and others want to say, that his whole raison d'etre was to beat up the Plishtim, why didn't he take this opportunity here? He had a perfect opportunity. This was an ambush that was set for him. It was a trap. Nobody could have faulted him for breaking these ropes and then beating them up, but he doesn't do that. So that's an interesting thing. Yes, Howard first.
Oh, it's Howard first. Very cute.
More than 20
hey,
years
don't be so mean. Go on, Howard.
More than 20 years ago, we had exactly the same thing. Immediately before the jawbone of an ass incident, we have in paragraph 14 of chapter 15, exactly the same thing, where he's bound with cords, and they became as flax that was burnt with fire. So he knows his capabilities in this regard.
Okay, and yes, that's exactly my point, Howard. Last time when that happened, what did he do after those ropes were like nothing? He got a jawbone of an ass and he killed 1,000 people.
Yeah.
My point is that this time he didn't. And so I think we see a change in Shimshon's personality. Yes, Faye. Yeah, he matured with age. Yes, Faye.
Okay, let me open it. Okay, what I see, and it's very interesting, very very sheltered population we have watching this. This is where all kinds of, I think as he got older, here to zonot and whatever, and having these love affairs. His bondage is one thing, and here is the king, and there they are where he finds.
Faye, it's very hard to hear you. You've gone mute. We couldn't really hear that. Can you say that again?
Oh, okay. I don't know. Somebody muted me. I thought I was okay. I'm saying that there are all kinds of kinks. He was obviously a very sexual being. Okay, and he finally dies at this orgy, right? You go to, like, there were these places called Plato's Retreat or something like that. And they have all kinds of kinks. They have voyeurism. There are people who like to come there just to watch. And there are people who like to be watched. And there are people who are into bondage and whatever the other end of it is. I don't know if it's sadomasochism or, I think they've got like letters to denote it. But I think as he got older, he got more perverse. And here he is, the final scene in the Samson Delilah is, an orgy. So, I think perhaps, I'm sure the Rabbanim didn't go there, but I think, some of these things point to some of the kinks.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, Michael.
I'd just like to comment that it's a bit surprising to me, but Faye seems to know a lot about these things. Maybe we can find out more afterwards.
Yes, perhaps we'll do a Desert Island Discs for Faye.
Yeah.
Maybe find out a few more details about this, but perhaps this is not quite the forum. Okay, so interestingly, he doesn't have a go at them, and then very interestingly, I mean, if I was Samson, I would be very cross with Delilah at this point, because it would be very clear that she had betrayed me. And what Delilah very cleverly does is she practices a classic piece of transference. She gets cross with Samson. A chutzpah. She gets cross with Samson. Let's see what she says.
Can I just say, Johnny, that I think he's showing a sense of humour in these 3 little episodes, because he's tagging her along.
I agree.
Anyway.
I agree entirely. I think he is entirely showing a sense of humour. I think it shows a much more mature and relaxed Shimshon. He's not as angry. I agree with you entirely. I think he's playing them along. Remember, he likes to play people along. Remember, we started this whole story with the riddle at the wedding. He likes to especially when he wins. He doesn't like it so much when he doesn't win. But here he's winning, isn't he? Because he's not told her the real reason. So let's see how she turns this around. And instead of him being angry with her, she's cross with him. Verse
12.
Verse 12. Is that where we're up to?
I think so.
No, verse 10, I think.
Ah, right, yes. Delilah said to Samson, "Behold, you have mocked me and told me lies. Now tell me how you can be bound." He said to her, "If they bind me up with new ropes, with which work has never done, with which work was never done, then I would become weak and be like any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, "Philistines are upon you, Samson." And the ambush party was sitting in the room. Samson snapped off his arms like a thread.
Okay, we've got exactly the same story. He winds her up again, if you'll pardon the pun. And the same thing, the ambush party are there in the room, waiting to pounce on him. And again, the same thing. We don't see Samson retaliating, neither against Delilah nor against the Pelishtim. We see a completely different Samson here. We don't see the raging, angry, vengeful Samson that we saw 20 years ago. We see a much more relaxed Samson with a sense of humor. He's winding them all up. And again, I would point out to the defenders of Samson's divine mission that if it was his divine mission to start with the Philistines, he has missed yet another opportunity here to do so, because he would have again been perfectly excused for taking out some of his anger on the Philistines, and he didn't do so. And I would suggest that if he had that divine mission in his head, then it had escaped him at this particular time. And so then she again gets upset with him.
Then Delilah said to Samson, "Up to now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you can be bound." He told her, "If you weave the 7 locks of my head onto a weaving rod." She fastened it with the peg of the loom. She said to him, "Philistines are upon you, Samson." He woke up from his sleep and tore out the peg of the loom and the weaving rod.
Okay, so here we see clearly that he was asleep, at least on this occasion. So his post-coital slumber was obviously of a very deep nature. For her to be able to weave his hair into this loom, to be able to bind him with ropes and everything. But here we see at least that this was, he woke up from his sleep. So this is the 3rd time that she has tried to betray him. Is it not amazing that Samson is still there? Why doesn't he boot her into touch? 3 times she's tried to get him killed. And 3 times he still stays with her. This is, to me, this is very, very weird. I can promise you this, if Elisheva did that to me even once, I would be off. First of all, I would be woken up very quickly. we'll not go into any other details, but there's no way, if somebody had betrayed me like that I would be hanging about for a third, a second, or a third, or a fourth attempt at betrayal and murder. So why is Shimshon hanging around?
Because
Yes,
he's a judge, and he's stupid.
Well, all judges are stupid?
Well, this one is for sure. If this guy's a judge, I'm the Pope.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, there you have it.
He's totally enthralled by her. He's totally enthralled by her. These things happen. It's quite possible. I mean,
yeah. Okay, Philip. It doesn't surprise me that you would do the same. Okay. Yes, Howard.
We've been told he's strong. We've never been told he's brilliant.
Okay, we're told he's strong, but he's not brilliant. All right. Okay. Well, I think we're all agreed, really, that this is very, very odd behaviour from Shimshon. And his stupidity actually gets to an even higher stage now as we see what happens next. This is a classic, and this next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 verses, 5, 6 verses are, I am absolutely convinced, these next 5 or 6 verses are the verses which made Cecil B. DeMille want to film this film, because this is the classic story. Let's hear what goes on from verse 15.
She said to him, "How can you say, 'I love you,' when your heart is not with me? This makes 3 times that you have mocked me and not told me what makes your strength so great." It happened that after she tormented him with her words every day and pressed him, he became exasperated to death.
Okay, stop there for a second. Here we have it. Nachum loves it. Nachum's loving it. Here, have a look at Nachum. He's really enjoying this. There we have it. Delilah basically nagged him to death. I mean, not even basically. That's what the Tanakh says. She pestered him and he became so irritated. He said, "I'd rather die than have all this nagging. You're nagging me to death, woman." But he still didn't leave. He still didn't leave. And then what did he do? He then goes and tells her the truth. And so clearly, as Philip has said, he was absolutely besotted and besozzled with her. And the fact that she nagged him to death was not enough for him to get up and leave. But here we have, I don't know of an earlier example in literature. If anybody can find me an earlier example in literature of the nagging woman, then I'd be happy to see it. But I think this is the earliest example of the woman using her charms and her nagging capability to get what she wants. Sorry, Helen.
A little later, you'll have Helen of Troy, but not earlier. Later, no, Helen of Troy.
Earlier. No.
This is not the
So here we have it.
I have my hand up this time, please.
Sorry, Faye, I didn't see your hand. Go ahead, Faye.
Okay. So I'm looking. I have this thing with the Tirgum David, and ta'aletzehu is the word. I guess we're calling it nagging. You know, she pressed him. Ta'aletzehu. And it says it's never been used before. And the way it explains it in here, and this is interesting, this is Rashi, that his soul was vexed because she avoided consummating whatever with him, you know, finally got, in other words, she frustrated him to the level where, you know, like if you ever read Portnoy, okay? So.
Okay, so basically she, according to this explanation, she shut up shop and said, "I'm not getting involved unless you tell me the truth." And as you said before, he's obviously has a very voracious sexual appetite, and that's probably a fair comment. That was what forced him to divulge the secret. Somebody else had their hand up before. Who was it? Was it you, Paul?
I just wanted to mention Yael also overcame somebody like that in a similar manner. previously.
Yael, yes. Yael enticed Sisera to sleep and then stuck a tent peg in his head, yes. But I don't think at that point Sisera was I mean, he'd only just arrived from the battlefront and she was somebody else's wife. I'm not sure that it was the same kind of relationship, but certainly the same thing happened and the result ended up pretty much the same. Yes, Howard?
Can I just say, because it's relevant, but tangential, that Hedy Lamarr, who you'll notice was cast as Delilah, was reckoned to be the most beautiful woman in the world at the time, patented frequency hopping, which is used in our mobile phones today. She was a genius. And secondly, Golda Meir was once asked if Israel had a Masada complex. In other words, there might be a point at which we'd all commit suicide if we're going to lose a battle. And Golda Meir said, no, we may have a Samson complex. If we go down, we take the whole of the world with us.
Very interesting. Okay, we'll come back to that perhaps in some more detail at the end of this chapter. I'd like to just, if we can, just do a little bit more. We might not just finish the chapter, but I want to try and do a little bit more before we finish. Let's carry on, Leon. So what happened? She nagged him to death, verse 17.
So he told her all that was in his heart and said to her, a razor has never gone up upon my head, for I am a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I would be shaven, my strength would leave me. I would become weak and be like any other man. Delilah saw that he had told her all that was in his heart. So she sent and summoned all the governors of the Philistines, saying, come up this time, for he has told me all that was in his heart. So the governors of the Philistines came up and brought up the money in their hands.
Okay, let's just stop there for a sec. So why do you think that she knew this time that he told her the truth? What was different about this time, do you think? Any offers? Well,
she had sex with him.
But I think she probably did that quite a lot, but yeah.
But yeah,
okay.
she turned him off.
Yeah, she'd switched off. Okay.
This time he mentions God.
Yes, absolutely, Paul. Absolutely. This time he mentions God. The first time that we see that in this encounter, that he invokes Hashem's name, and he would not have done that. I mean, we know from previous times that oaths, go back to the story of Yiftach, who was also not the greatest of geniuses. He made a vow. People don't use God's name in vain. Didn't use God's name in vain. She recognized that. And I think the other thing is, I'll come to you one sec, Sharon and Howard. The other thing I think that's important to know here is that this is a woman's intuition. A woman knows when he's telling the truth. He'd messed around with her for 3 times, and this time there was something qualitatively different. And I think that there is very much an element of female intuition here. She just knew. And what's also interesting, I want to point out in these 2 psukim, is that she obviously she went and said to the governors, the Philistine leaders, I've got him this time. This time I know it. Remember, they can't have been too chuffed with her because they've had 3 false starts. They've come up 3 times, they've come ready to chap him, and it's not happened. So this time, and she says, no, this time I've really got him. I know you've got him, so you better bring the dosh with you. And it says there, they brought the money with them. That's how sure she was that she'd got him this time. They actually brought the money with them when they came. Okay, Sharon. No, Sharon.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It seems to me that when he divulged not only about God, but also about his culture, that in his culture, he was a dedicated man to God and so forth, and that's why his appearance was what it was. That is a different level of cultural sharing and intimacy than they would have had that was just purely physical. And I'm not sure about the stereotype of women having intuition, but certainly this was a different level of communication than he had given to anyone through the whole book of Samson.
I think that's correct. I think that's correct. And it's just something else occurred to me as well as I just reread this. He says he's been a Nazarite of God from my mother's womb. And not only does he invoke his Hashem, he invokes his mother. Is that what you were going to say, Howard?
Not only did he invoke his mother, he invoked his mother's womb. Don't play around with these things.
That's right. You don't play around with those things. It only just occurred to me now as I looked in. Obviously, Howard had beaten me to it. Sorry that I said it before you.
No, you didn't.
Okay, so let's stop there because time's up. But I think we've seen, we know what's going to happen because we've all read the story or seen the film. But we can see here in this chapter, just to summarize what we said so far, there's been a time span of 20 years. At the beginning of this chapter, Samson seems very much more relaxed. He doesn't attack the Philistines when he had 4 opportunities to do so. He had an opportunity to do so at the gates of Gaza. He had 3 opportunities to do so when he was stringing along, if you'll pardon the pun, Delilah, and he didn't do so. We see a much more relaxed Shimshon, and we see eventually an exasperated Shimshon. Just to finish off, it's not something that I actually agree with, but in this book here by Rabbi Nachman Winkler, called Bringing the Prophets to Life, which I recommend, it's an excellent book. He says a point which I don't actually agree with, but he says that he wonders, he puts it out there, he wonders whether at this point Samson's fed up with his role, and actually he doesn't want this role of being the Superman, and somehow or other it's almost subconsciously he gives himself up. And we see that in psychological situations with abusers. Sometimes we see that with pedophiles and with abusers, that they do things almost intentionally to get caught because they want to get caught, because they recognize that things are not right. So he puts it out there that he puts out two different scenarios, neither of which I'm particularly fond of. He says that one that I've just said, that perhaps he's fed up with his mission. I'll come to you in a sec, Anita. Perhaps he's fed up with his mission and he wants to give it up. And the second thing he says, which I don't think so either, because of the passage that we've just read, he says that he's now so arrogant that he thinks that actually his strength is really nothing to do with God, and it's actually all his own. I think that's completely wrong, because I think that the verse 17 where he quotes, he invokes Hashem and he invokes his mother's womb, I think that tells us all we need to know on that score. But I put that out there just for those for completion. Yes, Anita.
It didn't say anything this time when he broke the ropes about the spirit of Hashem being with him this time. Beforehand, it said the spirit of Hashem came upon him, but it doesn't mention the spirit this time.
That's interesting. I wonder whether Rabbi Winkler he didn't say that, but perhaps that's what caused him to say that he thought now that this was, he had it in his mind that he was his own strength and didn't have anything to do with God.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting observation as well.
This is from my husband.
Right, Elisheva, which one, Elisheva, of which one of Rabbi Winkler's that he thought it was his own strength? Okay, Elisheva says she's going with Rabbi Winkler. She thinks that he had got so arrogant that now he thought that his strength was of his own making, and he wanted to be caught. So that's the psychotherapist's view. Yes, Helen.
Unmute me.
Helen, you wanted to say something?
I didn't, but I can if you want me to.
Yes, I want you to. I've not heard you for a long time. Come on,
Okay,
you have to have something to say to us.
I do, actually. I'm prepared to be completely shouted down by everybody, But I am finding it very, very difficult to find this whole story of Samson credible. And not only that, that if I believe that everything that we're told in the Tanakh, the Torah, is meant to teach us something. And I cannot find anything in this story that is supposed to teach us anything. Even if it's an allegorical story, I'm just struggling with the whole thing. And not only, and something else, I just wonder whether there's any archaeological evidence from the time to prove any of the story.
Okay, let me deal with the first aspect.
Sorry, I've just thrown that in at the end of the whole.
Yeah, as far as I know, the answer to the second question is no. But I will make a little bit of research over the next week and see if there's anything that anybody has come up with. But to take the first point, I happen to think that it is acceptable to say that these stories are allegorical. I happen to think that it's acceptable to say that they are exaggerated, if that's what you feel. I do think there are things that we can learn from this whole story, and I'll just throw a couple of them out there. And I think one of the things that we can learn from this is and in fact the modern commentators and in fact the Gemara as well do stress this, and this is this, that it says Yiftach b'doro k'Shmuel b'doro. The Yiftach is to be considered in his generation like Shmuel in his generation. Yiftach is given as the example of the worst of the leaders that we had. Shmuel is given as the example of the best of the leaders we had. And what it's saying is that there has been a failure of leadership in this story, and also a failure of fellowship. And I use that word advisedly, Michael, before you get upset about it. I read it yesterday in Rabbi Jonathan Sacks's book regarding the story of the spies. So it does exist, that word fellowship. There's been a failure of leadership and a failure of fellowship. What we have here is a dysfunctional society of the Israelites. And if you think the Israelites were bad in these chapters, wait till you get to the next chapter, chapter 17 and chapter 18, which we finish off the book of Shoftim with. It gets much worse. And we see the way we have what's called Yeridot Hadorot, the descent of the generations, and how we, as a people, as the Israelite people, they descended from the high of being with Moshe Rabbeinu and Yehoshua bin Nun as their leaders, to the situation where we have the best we can do is a Shimshon. And I think that what this is teaching us is that the generation gets the leader it deserves, and the leader gets the people that he deserves or she deserves. So I certainly have a certain degree of sympathy with you. You know me, I'm as a rationalist as they come. So I have a degree of sympathy with the idea that this may not be entirely to be taken entirely literally, although I have no problem with those who want to take it literally, and I think probably it's somewhere in between the two. We have the story of Goliath coming up in a couple of books' time, similar sort of giant. But I do think that we can find things to learn from it. We can certainly find things how not to be a leader, how not to do things. And as I've said to you many times before, it's often easier to learn how not to do things than it is to how to learn things. I told you when I was teaching Moilim, I used to send the junior Moilim out with the worst Moil in town and ask him what they'd learned from him. Somebody that was close to me very recently left his job, and I asked him what he'd learned while he was there, and he said, I learned how not to run a business. So I think it's a bit of an upside down thing, but I think there are things you can learn from this book without sort of being completely exasperated by it. Okay, it's 11:15. Last few comments. Philip and Howard, I've got their hands up. Oh, and Sharon. Last 3 comments. Philip.
I read by a Reform rabbi, I'm not sure which one, it may have been Rick Jacobs, but I'm not sure, that the whole thing was actually because Samson was a closet homosexual.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Next, Howard.
Well, I just asked a friend of mine who obtained a PhD in archaeology. She made Aliyah about 40 years ago from Tel Aviv University. Whether I asked her, is there any archaeological evidence to substantiate anything about Shimshon? And she wrote, nope. And then she wrote, really no external proof of a biblical figure before the 9th century BCE. Even a mention of the house of David, i.e. some sort of Davidic dynasty, appears nearly 200 years after he was supposed to have reigned. So I don't think we'll invite her to join these shiurim.
Okay, I think probably not. Okay, thank you for that. Last comment. Where are you? Sharon, last comment before we close.
It's actually Larry, and I think the moral of the story is that no matter how strong and powerful men are, women will always outwit us in the end.
Okay, on that rather sobering note, thank you, Larry. We'll call it a day for today. And join for next week's exciting episode. And if you can't wait, you can always go onto YouTube and watch the film.